So I can start. Thank you to Ocker as well for giving us the opportunity to present our new product, Alberdingk Ren AC 8403. So the topic of today really is sustainability without compromise. So we move on to the next slide. We can talk about the agenda that we will talk about. So I will give a brief introduction to Alberdingk Boley. For everybody who doesn't know the company, we will define the problem that we want to address with Ren AC 8403. I will then hand over to Markus, who will give a more technical information on the product and some performance results of the product in DTM applications. And then we will finish with some conclusions, and we will have time at the end for a Q&A session. So, Alberdingk Boley, who are we? As you can see from this timeline, we're established in 1772. So Alberdingk is over 250 years old, 253 years to be exact. And we started off importing oils in Holland and in Germany. And we've now evolved into a global technology company. So some milestones along this journey. In 1970, we began the production of water-based acrylic dispersions. In 1985, we then began manufacturing polyurethane dispersions, and in 2005, we began the production of 100% polyurethane polyols. We have plants in China, which was established in 2007, and in USA in 2000. If you go on to the next slide. So this slide gives quite a simplified overview of the products that we're offering to the market. So starting with the acrylic dispersions, we have a range of acrylic dispersions, both pure acrylic and styrene acrylic, based on heterogeneous and homogeneous morphologies, including straight acrylic and acrylics with self-cross-linking technology. We have a very broad range of polyurethane dispersions, based on polyester, polyether, and polycarbonate polyol technology, ranging from very soft, flexible polyurethane dispersions to very hard polyurethane dispersions with high chemical resistance. And we still offer linseed oil and castor oil into the markets, and also derivatives of those oils. So as you can imagine, this broad product range leads us into quite a broad range of application areas. So we service a lot of industries, including architectural and decorative coatings, both interior and exterior wood, metal corrosion products for corrosion-resistant primers. We also sell into plastic coating, and more and more we're getting more involved in the building and construction industries. Further application areas include PSA applications for labels and tapes. We have a range of products for leather, finish, and textile coatings, adhesive for heat seal applications, floor coatings. We sell products into pharmaceuticals and cosmetic applications. And more we're getting more involved in printing and packaging market, where there's a big trend to move away from plastic packaging to paper packaging technology. So in terms of our global footprint, we're headquartered in a town called Krefeld. The nearest city is Düsseldorf. We have our R&D center in Krefeld, and we have 3 production plants in Germany, one in Krefeld, one in Kerpen, and one in Leuna. We also have 2 further production facilities, one in the USA and one in China. We also have companies in Europe, Alberdingk Italia in Treviso, which is near Venice, and Alberdingk UK in Wetherby. So as you can see, we have a very, very strong global footprint, so we can service most companies throughout the world with one of these production units. So what's the definition of the problem that we want to address today? So for us, sustainability isn't just about selling a water-based product or a bio-based product. Really, a sustainable coating should deliver a long-lasting performance using less material and with a lower environmental footprint throughout the entire life cycle of that product. So this is going to result in lower CO2, using safer raw materials or less hazardous raw materials without sacrificing durability or performance. And for us, if a sustainable coating doesn't last, we believe it's not sustainable. And we want to address these issues with the product REN AC 8403, which Markus will go into more detail now. So if I can hand over to you, Markus, for the technical part.
Yeah, thank you very much. And again, a warm welcome also from my side. Before we get into the details of the product, it's probably worth stepping one step back and thinking about what does corrosion resistance and corrosion resistance classification mean. So today, and this is an old matrix, so for those which are corrosion geeks, they will realize that this table is from an old version of the norm. You have the different protection levels from C1 to C5 marine or C5 industrial, the highest corrosion resistance. And usually this table was used to say, okay, if you use this kind of coating, you want to have this protection level, it will give you this amount of service time, but you need to have a required dry film thickness, and you will have then a certain amount of salt spray hours that you can achieve. What we are trying to do, because we are trying to have something that is more sustainable, we are trying to combine a low film thickness, which is usually more like a C2 type film thickness, with the resistance of a C5 protection level. So if we can reduce the dry film thickness without compromising the properties, that is the ideal scenario. And we do that by achieving or we achieve that by having a proper barrier, which is created by the polymer matrix that we are using. We avoid active pigments. We try to have a non-classified or less classified raw materials according to GHS, and still have also a good blocking resistance of this coating. So it sounds like the holy grail, but you will see that it's actually more real than you probably think of. So if we look at the product that we are going to present, which I think we missed to explain that on the first slide, you could see that it has won a BCF award this year, being the most sustainable product in the category. So REN AC 8403 is actually a derive of a product which has been well established into the market, which is called Alberdingk AC 2403. That's, so to say, the mother of 8403. With the introduction of this kind of technology now more than a decade ago, we were able to more or less revolutionize water-based corrosion protection. And that is because we are having a self-cross-linking but super hydrophobic multi-phase acrylic dispersion. What does that mean apart from a nice marketing slogan? You will see that in a minute. We've got a solids level here of 47%. We've got a neutral pH. We've got a relatively low viscosity of 200 to 2000 millipascal, low MFFT of 16 degrees centigrade, which is thanks to the fact that it's a multi-phase acrylic. And here, as the topping on the cake, you are having 32% bio-based carbon content in the product, which can be analyzed with a C14 method. And the let's say the reason why is it only 32%, because some people would say, oh, I've seen products with a higher carbon content. So what we are trying to do here as a strategy is we try to maintain all the properties of the mother polymer, the AC2403, but try to bring as much renewable carbon into the system as possible. So we are not trying to change the product performance. We're not trying to change the product properties, but what we're trying to do is maintain the super high performance and then do that with extra renewable carbon. So if we have a quick look into polymer chemistry, how do you make, let's say, normal acrylic polymers. So on the left-hand side, and I hope you can see my cursor, you have a reactor here with water inside, which is represented with blue. And then you have a green tank here, which is filled with a green liquid, which is the monomer solution, or it could be a pre-emulsion, so monomer and surfactant. And that's been fed over time. So you see the mass is reduced over time. It's a linear function. And you are getting, at the end, particles of a polymer with a homogeneous structure. That's what Jason mentioned before. And these polymers then, they can be hard, they can be soft, but they're all the same composition, which has advantages and disadvantages. So why would you bother making something more complex? So a multi-phase product consists at least of 2 different monomer feeds, as you can see here. So you have a green and you have a different color feed, a gray here. And these 2 are being fed one after the other in this example. They could also be fed in a gradient. So you can have different morphologies at the end, and you are getting different particles, but still having the same total mass of monomer. But if you distribute it differently, you're getting different properties and different shapes of particles, or different morphology of particles. So the most common one that people know and that people will always talk about is, they would say, oh, it's a core shell product. Yeah, that is one sort of a multi-phase acrylic, but it's not what we're talking about today. But at least as it's the most commonly known, it's probably worthwhile trying to explain the difference. So you can see here, there are 2 core shell morphologies here. So one where you have a yellow shell and a green core, and you've got the other one, so with a green shell and a yellow core. So imagine that the green monomer mixture is soft with a low TG, and imagine that the yellow one is the hard one with a very high TG material. So what happens here with the particle on the right-hand side? If you put them all together, they will start to form a film. So the particle boundary will be lost, and you will have one uniform film. And then you could think of it like that the green material will flow away during film formation. So it will create a kind of a lake of molten material, because the TG is below room temperature. And in this molten material, you will have these little yellow spheres swimming on top of this sticky glue, and that will give you an additional blocking resistance, for instance. So you are touching the yellow spheres, you're not touching the green glue that's underneath, and therefore you are getting a film which feels much less tacky, although it can still have a very low MFFT. On the yellow one, on the left side with a yellow shell, it would be the opposite. So here you are having a hard shell and a soft core. And if you don't use tons of coalescing agents, it will be even difficult to get any coalescence. So it could be that you will apply it, you will try to add coalescence, but you will never get a proper film, because the yellow material will never really flow away, and it will kind of encapsulate the green adhesive. And only if you put tons of solvents, you eventually might be able to get a proper film, but the VOC level would be extremely high. That's just one example. There are plenty of other morphologies like raspberry, like half moon structures, and they all have their pros and cons, and they can also have impact on mechanical properties and many other things. But today we like to concentrate on something more fancy, and that is what you can see at the bottom. So here, it's the artist's conception of a particle which has been cut into half, and then you are looking at it from the side. And what you see is here what we would call a salami morphology, or you could also say it's kind of a papaya morphology. So you cut the particle in half, you look at it from the side, and then you see that there is this green mass which is film forming, with lots of small dots of yellow hard polymer inside, which looks then like a salami, where you have the meat and the fat distribution among the slice of the salami. And the green material, again, will flow off. It's low TG. It forms a film. But unlike in the other example where you have these large spheres, you will have much more tiny spheres swimming on the surface, also meaning that there is much less void in between individual particles because they are smaller, so the packing is much more dense. How does that look in reality? So if you make an AFM picture of such a resin surface, on the left-hand side, you have a conventional proper core shell acrylic emulsion with a particle size of probably like 80, 90 nanometers, which has been formed a film, and then it has been analyzed with atomic force microscopy in tapping mode. And here you have to understand that the yellowish color, the very light color material, is hard polymer. And the dark matter underneath is the film forming matrix, the soft polymer. So what you're seeing here is you're seeing spherical material with approximately 50 nanometer domain size. So in these 18, 90 nanometer particle, you have a hard material, which is probably like 50 nanometer in dimension. On the right-hand side, you see the same made from the REN AC 8403, and you will see that it looks extremely different. It looks more like, let's say, honeycomb structure, and that it's a much finer structure. So it does more or less the same as the left-hand side, but on a much, much finer scale, exactly 10-fold smaller. So it's 5 nanometer domain size, which means that if you apply a film at a given thickness on the REN AC 8403, you will always have 10-fold more layers of film-forming material compared to the left-hand side. So you can imagine that the barrier that you are getting is much better because you have more layers of material, meaning you have longer diffusion way, you have a more impermeable material, and you're getting a more perfect film formation, which is always the thing about water-based polymers. How can you improve the quality of film formation? Because we're not operating as solvents in a solution where it's always perfect. So we have to find ways and measures to make a water-based polymer based on dispersion technology, bring it closer to a solution polymer without any negative impact. And that is what we've done here. Thanks to that morphology, we are having a much more perfect quality of information. So we use that then, as this is about corrosion protection, in a starting point formula. And the one thing that we are proud of is that we don't use any zinc. So we don't need to use any aquatoxic pigment. We don't need to have the compromise of finding polymers which are so stable that you can have a good stability of the dispersion particle against bivalent cations, because there will always be soluble bivalent cations in such an active pigment, and they will potentially bridge particles. So you will see that in viscosity increase over time. You will see poor properties. You might see poor resistances of the dispersion film because people have deliberately stabilized the polymer so strongly that it can survive the bivalent cations. So here we are working completely zinc-free, and as a plus, as an additional plus, we are getting films which can be very, very high gloss, which is difficult if you have an active pigment because they are usually not known to give perfectly high gloss finishes. So this is a PVC 22 formulation, and what you should take special note of is we are using here a particular dispersant, the EDA plant 490. We are using a fairly standard small particle size calcium carbonate, standard solvents, water soluble in this case because our polymer is extremely hydrophobic, so we prefer to have hydrophilic solvents. Excuse me. And we are using one active material here, which is the asconium 142Da, which is giving us improved adhesion at ascribe. And we are using a little bit of a flash rust inhibitor here, which is the ascrotan H10. All in all, a very simple kind of white paint enamel type formulation, nothing super special. If you then test that in corrosion resistance, you are getting this result. And here you have a comparison of the REN AC 8403 against Alberdingk AC 2403, which is the benchmark here, and the mother polymer. So you have both formulations are the same, just the polymer is different. So on the left-hand side, you have bio-based, and on the right-hand side is conventional fossil fuel-based monomers. The dry film thickness is in between 120 and 130 microns. And we have stopped the test after 1,728 hours of neutral salt spray testing. And you can see that the scribe, which is the new scribe according to the new ISO, which is milled and not cutted, there is literally no damage on the left-hand side and maybe a minor damage on the right-hand side, but both would easily pass the inspection. And not only would they pass the salt spray testing, they will also pass humidity testing, and they pass exterior durability, so QUV resistance, etc., etc. This is just the most extreme test. And one thing to think about, so why are these products so particular? Why are they so special? One thing that you can learn about polymers, if you read a lot about it, is that the water absorption of polymers is linked to the TG. So if you have a polymer in a molten stage, it will have a higher water absorption than a polymer in a solid state. So if you have a test, which like here operates at higher temperatures, you can reduce the overall water absorption by having a portion of polymer which has a lower water absorption. So what I mean is, if you have these two phases, soft and hard, and the hard materials TG is way above the TG of the testing temperature in your salt spray chamber, that will contribute to much better properties because you are having lower water absorption with the hot water or the hot salt solution. That helps to a great extent, apart from other measures that we've taken to get these properties. But the TG is a very important thing, and not only in corrosion testing, but also in other applications where you are dealing with different test temperatures. It's worth keeping in mind that there is this difference in between the solid state and the molten state of the polymer. So white or even an anti-corrosive red with some famous Bay Fyrox 130 is not really such a big challenge anymore. And I think you've seen many presentations where people were able to present nice looking panels with good corrosion resistance. We've tried to bring it to the next level. So we've spent a lot of time searching for ways to make literally any color in water-based and maintaining the C5 corrosion resistance level. So what we thought then was we need to investigate commercial pigment preparations, because that's what most people will use. But we will also have to investigate what's the impact of the pigment choice and the dispersion choice on the corrosion resistance if you make a colored anti-corrosive coating. And we start here with these nice black panels, and it's just a small fraction of the things that we tested. So we always try to use 5 and 10% of paste. Excuse me. to show the impact, because in certain cases you want to use a lot of black pigment just for the hiding power and quick hiding. And you can see that on the right-hand side with the commercial paste, even 5%, you're already doomed, and the corrosion resistance is not good. If you're using more, because you have to use more than 10%, it's complete rubbish. And I have to also to add that this is 1,440 hours. So we screened a lot of dispersants, and we screened a lot of carbon blacks. And maybe as a surprise, the most difficult one that you can find, the FW200, gives the best anti-corrosive properties. So the usual thought process was find a pigment where the dispersant level can be reduced, because if you have less dispersant, you will have a less hydrophilic total paint film, which will automatically lead to better corrosion resistance. In carbon black, that's probably not the case. So you see here, we have to use 100% of active dispersant on the total pigment, which is quite a lot. And the explanation why the FW200 is so much better than others is probably related to the fact that most carbon blacks are very acidic. FW200 isn't. And when you're dealing with water-based polymers, and that's another thing to take home, and which counts for every polymer that you are using, they are very sensitive upon film formation to external stress. I've said before, bivalent cations can be a strong stress, but also could be low pH materials. And if you're having an acidic carbon black, even though you are putting buffer amines and stuff into it, they will certainly harm and reduce the quality of film formation. So if you want to have a most perfect film, in any case, you're always well advised to prevent adding multivalent cations or acidic or extreme alkaline materials as well in some cases. And you can see here that the most difficult carbon black produces a fantastic corrosion protection after 1,400 hours. But since metal coatings or industrial metal coatings are very often not just only black or white or gray, you can also ask, okay, what happens if you have a daffodil yellow color? How am I going to achieve that? Because these organic yellows are even worse in dispersing additive demand. And what you can see here is that we've got a commercial paste, and you can see here the load levels are higher because the hiding power is even poorer on the yellow. So with 20% paste, it's a complete disaster. But we've been talking to various pigment suppliers, and we found one interesting company in Germany that was able to provide us with blends of pigments aiming to a certain RAL color. So in this case, it's the Bruchsaler Farben. And you can see here the product Buchverband Yellow, where they achieve the RAL color with a minimum amount of organic pigment. So this yellow here contains a maximum amount of inorganic pigment. And that also explains why we only use 2.9% active dispersant on this pigment. And we're getting a fantastic, flawless corrosion protection after 1,440 hours. And we can continue this to Fire Brigade Red, which is exactly the same. So again, having the right pigment with the right blend of low organic content, although here it's higher, you can see it's 3.4% active dispersant on the pigment. You are always getting very, very good corrosion protection. I'll continue with a Reseda Green, and I think I finish also on the colorful journey here. It's the same, basically the same in green. Lower levels of organic pigment help to maintain the fantastic barrier of the film. If you try to use conventional pastes, or if you try to use conventional pigments, you are probably never going to achieve the same result, because there is no dispersant that would be able to stabilize the pigment and be hydrophobic enough not to harm the barrier of the polymer dispersion. So if we now think about the fact that we've got a polymer which apparently has a very, very good anti-corrosive barrier, or not only for liquid water, but also for water vapor, what else could you do with this? And one thing that almost immediately pops into the mind is, couldn't you make a stain locking primer? Yes, you can. So we have to be careful in the language. So it's a locking primer, it's not a blocking primer. But if you coat a piece of oak with a REN AC 8403, there might be a little bit of extraction of tannin. But after that, you recoat and there will no more further extraction, no more bleeding, because it's locking the stains, because it's so hydrophobic, it's so quickly water resistant. There is no further discoloration in the top coat. The question is, are the final customers going to accept the locking, or would they really want the blocking? That's up to the final customer's decision. The other thing you can do is you can make a so-called stick-to-anything paint. So thanks to the self-cross-linking and the adhesion-promoting chemistry that we are using on the REN AC 8403, it sticks to loads of different plastics and metal and even inorganic surfaces. And because it's so impermeable, water has little chance to go in between the interface of a substrate and the coating film, which is very often a mode of failure that, let's say in theory, you have a good dry adhesion, but when you try to check for the wet adhesion, there is a layer of water going in between the coating film and the actual substrate, and then you can peel off the paint. So with 8403, that's much less of an issue because of the fantastic barrier. And then a more recent development that we found is it's also very, very good for concrete coatings. So you can, for instance, have molded concrete parts, coat them with a clear lacquer of AC 8403, and you have improved efflorescence resistance. It stops water from getting into the stone. It will give you fantastic intercoat adhesion if it's been coated with other materials as a top coat afterwards. And it can be actually used as a moisture vapor suppressant. And in this case, we combine it with another renewable acrylic, the REN AC 8003, to reduce the film forming temperature without coalescent. And then we can potentially replace even PVDC in MVS primers on a construction site. And I'm going to show you some example here. So what we did here is we prepared screed pieces, which we tested for moisture vapor transmission. So you prepare the screed, you coat it the next day, and then you put it into an MVTR testing. And you can see on the right-hand side, if it's uncoated, the screed has a very high MVTR of 422 grams per square meter per day. But then if you coat it with the current gold standard in moisture vapor transmission rate suppression, the PVDC, which contains halogens, which has a low pH, which is a pain to formulate, you get an MVTR of 27, which is pretty low. If you formulate a combination of the REN AC 8403 and the REN AC 8003, you can see that you are also getting the same MVTR value that you are getting from the PVDC. So that is something we are currently exploring. We are trying to fine-tune that. But as it stands, it seems that this technology enables us to replace PVDC in a lot of its applications. So PVDC used to be a dominant coating binder in metal coatings. And it still is. It is a dominant primer in construction coatings as suppressant, moisture suppressant. And it's also a very, very big material in packaging coatings, where we have food contact compliant versions of the technology, which can also stop moisture and which can also replace PVDC. Which brings us to the conclusion that if you ever wanted to have a green Swiss Army knife, Alberdingk Ren AC 8403 is probably the product of choice, because like a Swiss Army knife, it can have different versatile tools. It has the multi-substrate adhesion. It's got the extremely good anti-corrosion properties. It's got these fantastic water resistance and moisture vapor barrier, and it can do stain locking. So it's a tool which should not be missed in any toolbox in a paint company. So to summarize, Alberdingk Ren AC 8403 provides the highest possible corrosion protection standards, and we have that tested also by third-party institutes, and they always confirm that we can achieve C5 level. But we combine that with a very, very low dry film thickness. We do not need to use hazardous heavy metals, so no zinc, no strontium, no whatsoever, which gives us the capability of having high gloss coatings, because we don't need the active pigment, which can potentially reduce the gloss. We can have eco-label compliant formulations. In this particular case here, we have a fraction of 32% bio-based carbon in the resin. And as a summary, the super hydrophobic nature makes it the first choice for all applications where you need to have water or moisture resistance. So everything where you have a headache due to water, that's probably the first choice to solve the problem. So we started with the definition of the problem. Now we see that there is a solution based on Ren AC 8403. So the sustainability in coating means delivering long-lasting performance using less material with lower environmental footprint across the entire life cycle. So we have a lower CO2 footprint through the product life cycle because it's bio-based. We have lower transportation cost, and we'll go to that in a minute. We have a safer material with less hazardous chemicals. So we do something for the water that we all want to drink because we don't need to use aquatoxic pigments. But we still have extremely high durability and performance, so a longer service life because of the very high corrosion resistance combined with extremely good weathering resistance. So we don't need to make any compromises on performance, although we use less material. And brings us back to what Jason said at the beginning. If a sustainable coating doesn't last, it's not sustainable. And this one clearly is sustainable. Here you have one nice example picture. What could sustainability actually mean? So if you think about using the Ren AC 8403 on a shipping container, and again, you've got the bio-based content, you get the C5 corrosion performance, you don't need to use the aquatoxic pigments. But if you reduce the film thickness from the standard coating, which was given in the matrix by 320 microns, and you could do it down to 80 microns with the Ren AC 8403, you are saving 32 kilograms of paint per container. And on a normal shipping vessel with 14,500 containers, you can save 465 metric tons of weight only because of the paint. So you have less fuel, you will have less carbon being emitted on the ship or by the ship because it's a lighter transport, and you would not need to sacrifice the resistance of the shipping container. That brings us to the end. We hope and look forward to a lot of questions. And if you want to contact us outside of this, these are our two contact details in case you prefer this way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Markus. Great presentation.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, both of you. Some interesting points there. I was rather impressed with the 1,400 hours salt spray, because that is quite hard to achieve, and it does seem to be a very versatile all-round polymer. But we've got some questions in the chat, so I'll go through these. So the questions are, can you share some start point formulations with and without zinc phosphate inhibitor? Is that something
Only without. I mean, you've seen the ones in the slide. So once the recording is available, you can take the one from the recording, but you can also contact us. We've got actually product information here, which is almost as thick as a book. I don't know, 40 pages of product information. So it's probably much better as a read over Christmas than any crime book. But there is no starting point formulation which uses zinc because we don't like to use that. The polymer particle is stabilized in a way that adding zinc to the coating can always lead to poorer film formation. And when the quality of film formation is compromised, you're not getting the results. So it's not worth trying it. And it's even not cheap. I mean, active pigments are not cheap. So why bother?
Yeah, he's also asked if you have one using a halox inhibitor.
Yes.
Okay.
Liquids, not solids.
Okay, thank you. And then a question from Everett Bolt. Are the pigments which are selected all lead-free and the pastes used also lead-free?
Well, it's all lead-free. I mean, if we talk about being worried about zinc and then using lead, that would be an absolute no-go. No, there is no lead.
I didn't think you could use lead.
I hope it's all long gone. I mean,
yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, I think it is.
And can you also explain the stain locking primer?
Yeah, the stain locking primer is pretty much a fairly straightforward white enamel or white. I mean, the formulation that we've seen without the anti-corrosive liquids. You could potentially, yeah.
I think the question, maybe I'm misreading the question, but I think it's, can you explain the difference between stain blocking and stain locking? What you mean? What is our interpretation of the difference in this property? I think that's the question.
Okay.
I think.
Okay. If that's the difference, so in a stain blocking primer, you paint a white paint over an oak film, oak wood substrate, and the white paint would still look white after you've painted the oak. If you use a stain locking primer, you apply the primer, and some of the tannin can be extracted into the white paint film. But because it's a primer, and when it's been recoated, nothing will migrate into the top coat. That's why it's locking the stains in the primer. But the primer is not bright white shiny. It may be a little bit discolored because of some extraction. I was thinking of the formulation, so I'll quickly do that. So how does a stain locking formulation look like? So it's pretty much the primer formulation that we've seen without the anti-corrosive materials, the asconium and the ascotron. And then you would potentially have some stain blocking chemistry inside, and there is one product, the Syntrostain 472, made by Syntron in France, which is pretty compatible in a product like the AC2403, because also these materials very often contain bivalent metal cations, and they can also harm the stabilization system of the polymer, so you need to be careful. But the Syntrostain 472 was actually pretty stable.
Okay, thank you. And another question is, how is the salami morphology achieved versus core shell?
Yeah, that's a good question, which I wouldn't like to go into too much detail.
Okay,
just enjoy the Italian salami, high quality type from Milan with a fine distribution of meat and fat, and leave it there without explaining how you get there. It's all about let's say process and raw materials that determines this, and that's the trade secret. I'm sorry for that.
No, that's fair enough. What is the minimum VOC that can be achieved with the REN AC 8 or 0.3?
Yeah, that's it's an interesting question. I would say you could formulate with zero VOC coalescing agents, and you could say then it's extremely low VOC. However, I would not necessarily recommend that, and that's something I mentioned briefly somewhere in the middle of the presentation, that the starting point formula contains Dauvanot DPM. And one thing very often that's been misunderstood in water-based polymers is the choice of coalescing agents. So let me say 2 or 3 things. One is you first need to understand the difference in between water-soluble coalescing agents and insoluble coalescing agents. So what you want is you want to have a long open time. So for long open time, easy workability, brushing, or even if you spray, you want to modify the evaporation of the water. And you can only do that if you use a water-soluble solvent, because then you manipulate what's happening to the water. If you take a water-insoluble solvent, which then the most non-VOC types are insoluble, you have a solvent which cannot stay in the water phase. So that will have to migrate into the particles. When it does that, very often you will see that the paint becomes thicker while adding it, which is a consequence of the fact that the solvent or the coalescing agent migrates into the polymer particles become softer, they swell, they grow in size. So let's say you have 18 nanometers at the beginning, you're adding your coalescing agent and you may end up with maybe 90 nanometers. That needs more space, but there are a lot of small particles, so there is not that much space. And eventually you are seeing a viscosity increase. So that is one thing that happens. And at the same time, because the distance in between the individual particles is reduced by the fact that they've grown in size, they will also coalesce quicker and easier with each other. So the polymer itself is softer because you added the strong coalescing agent, making the polymer chains more maneuverable. They're bringing closer to each other, which then means they will smash together much more quickly, and you will have a quicker film formation. So adding a water-insoluble solvent leads to less open time, but not to, let's say, quicker drying in a way, because the hardness then is compromised by the fact that this kind of plasticizer remains in the film. If you have a particularly hydrophobic material, like the Ren AC 8403, the attraction of the polymer to very, very hydrophobic materials is very high. That means the release of these coalescing agents is very slow to minimal. So if you want to see the best blocking resistance, the best hardness, you have to use hydrophilic solvents. And in these hydrophilic solvents, 2 stand out as being the best for corrosion resistance, blocking resistance, and overall properties. One is DPM, which is a VOC. And the other one is even much more exotic. It's the ProGlide DMM, which people probably know as a diluent for isocyanates, and which is usually not reducing the MFFT of water-based polymers. But because it's so hydrophobic, the super hydrophilic solvent actually does reduce the MFFT and leads to the highest final hardness of the film. So yes, you can make low VOC, no VOC coatings. Is it recommended? It wouldn't be my first choice. I mean, we've done it many times, it works, but you compromise on some of the properties. If it's for decorative type, where you want to have super low VOCs, fair enough, that's fine. If you want to do a professional metal protection, you probably are more after the performance, and then I would always recommend to use a hydrophilic solvent.
Okay, thank you. And somebody else has asked, what would be the maximum gloss that you can obtain?
I think, I mean, and then again, we have to be careful, because when people talk about gloss, we talk about different angles. I think in a 20 angle, which for me is the only one which gives you proper gloss reading, it's 75-ish, close. It's not far away from 80. So it's the most high gloss material, because again, you have to consider that these morphology creates a roughness on the surface. And gloss is a function of smoothness. So the more smooth the surface is, the more glossy it can be. So having the superfine salami type domain structure, you have a more smooth rough surface, which then leads to still a pretty good gloss. Whereas a coarse shell acrylic, you'll never ever be able to bring it to that gloss level because of the morphology and the fact that the light will be scattered by the texture of the film.
Okay, thank you. So somebody else has now put, regarding the formulation that you shared, did you also test other dispersing agents, and did you see a significant difference in anti-corrosive performance?
The answer is yes and yes. So we've been doing this now for more than a decade. And when the journey has started, there were no dispersants on the market which were specifically developed for being very hydrophobic, because pigment, or let's say additive suppliers, they're obsessed with dispersion speed, color strength, all these kind of things. But if you ask them what is the best additive for high chemical resistance, or which additive does not or does have a minimum negative effect on my paint film, very often you will just see their shoulders going up and they wouldn't know. So we had to screen probably more than 100 dispersants until we found some which worked, probably by accident. The supplier would say by design. And one you've seen is the EDA plan. We know that there are now many other which work quite well, and we have a full list of dispersants which work. So I don't want to go through all the suppliers because somebody might feel discriminated.
Fair enough. I'm just conscious of the time, actually. I've got quite a few questions still to go. Bio-based part, was it C14 or mass balance?
C14.
I thought
That's
so.
an easy one to answer.
Yeah, I wrote that down, actually. Is the life cycle analysis of the product available to be shared?
It is available. I have to say, if you are dealing with, and that's why we are not just focusing and being obsessed by the 32% bio-based content. If you are into LCAs, you know that the data quality of a lot of the raw materials is still pretty rubbish, to be very open. So we have on our PCFs, we have a traffic light system. So where we have a green, a yellow, and a red traffic light because of the data quality that is behind. And that's probably still one which has a red traffic light because the data quality for some of the raw materials is just not really reliable yet. I mean, that will improve during the course of the time. We all know that. And if you look into 3 databases, you might find 4 different values for one raw material. So it's a developing story, and that's why the sustainability emphasis here is much more on performance and dry film and weight versus pure PCF data.
Okay, thank you. Can you please give more details on the EU Eco label compliance?
So the polymer itself has nothing inside that would stop us from having an eco label. The thing here is the formulation. So if you are using certain active materials, you would then be losing your EU eco label compliance. And that's what we've been trying to address here, try to use eco label compliant raw materials. And if you talk to people like Ascotec in France, which are a partner of ours, they can tell you exactly which are their best combinations to achieve certain environmental logos, even with an anti-corrosive performance.
Okay. And is the silane containing formulation storage stable?
Yeah, at least somebody knows exactly what Asconium 142Da is. Yes, it is stable. So you can take this, which is it's actually a blend of 3 substances. One is a silane, one is MBT, and one is a solvent, DPM. So in the way that we use it, that it's been pre-neutralized, added to the paint. If you test the paint over years and years, the same bucket of paint, you always find the same result. And if you've listened very carefully to what I've said we use that to improve the adhesion at the scribe. We are not using this because we need it for anti-corrosive performance. So what you see is when you mill the scribe and you don't use the zirconium, you will see blistering very next to the scribe. And the silane, which the questioner has identified, helps us to generate a much tighter and better adhesion at the scribe. So where you have an actual deliberate defect, and that then helps that the paint will look better over the course of the 1,440 hours, so you don't see blistering at the scribe. But the corrosion itself is not much different. So even if you would have blisters, there would be no corrosion underneath.
Okay. And what is the shelf life of the product, and is it resistant to freezing?
Yeah, freezing is never good. I don't like to freeze. The product doesn't like to freeze. The stabilization chemistry is made to be as little as possible to generate the highest performance. So don't freeze it. It's not good. Maybe if there is enough solvent, probably that would work, but not on the pure polymer. Shelf life, I mean, the guaranteed shelf life is 6 months, but that's much more due to microbiological concerns and not about product performance. We are testing always benchmark batches that we have, and then they can be like 3-4 years old and they still deliver the same performance.
Okay, and then the final question, what would be the price difference versus the 2403? Is it
I
a
could maybe
similar
comment,
price?
Markus.
Yeah, that's happy to leave that with you.
I mean, obviously, we can't go into pricing or commercial topics during such a forum due to the nature of the audience, I think. But whoever asked the question, if they want to email us direct, we can obviously have that conversation. I mean, there is a premium for the bio-based version of 2403. But if you want to email us directly, we can go into more detail on a one-on-one basis. I think that's probably the best answer.
Yes,
And
absolutely.
it's probably worth adding that if you make a full costing, let's say, exercise, and you think about how much, if you have a large object to paint, how much does scaffolding cost, how much is the worker's time, if you're able to use a more expensive formulation, water-based formulation, but you have to use much less material, you very likely end up with a cheaper total coating cycle, even though you had to pay a premium for the paint as the final user. So it's not just all about the price of the raw material.
Oh, I've got some more questions coming now. Does the polymer alone give anti-corrosive properties, or is it the corrosion inhibitor that's required?
Now, yeah, it's a water-based polymer, so a corrosion inhibitor is good to stop the flash rust. If you don't use that, I mean, it doesn't look nice, but it still wouldn't corrode. The barrier is there. It's just that it doesn't look nice. The one thing I could say is that you could also paint it over rust, a DTR, direct to rust, and it wouldn't rust any further, unlike many TV ads, which you can see from famous paint companies advertising for rust conversion paints. So here you would even not need the rust converter, and it would still not rust further. But there are also rust converters available for neutral pH by Ascotec. There's a product called Ascotrust X4, for instance. If you add that to the 2403, you can also reconvert some of the rust into proper iron, and the 2403 will then protect the metal even further. So it's definitely another one bites the rust here.
Okay. And then the last question, have you tried, hang on, sorry, an email's just come over the top. Go away. Oh, I'll get it out. There we go. Have you tried disperbic 2080 or Disperbic 199 as dispersants? And if so, do they work as well as the Ediplan?
The two ones mentioned, I think I have to say, don't give it a try. It will be over very quickly, the salt spray testing. There are some products from Book which work, but not the ones that been mentioned.
Okay. Okay, well, I think we'll wrap it up there. So thank you very much, gentlemen, for a very interesting webinar this afternoon. And
Thank you. Thanks to Orca.
Thank you.
Thank
No,
you.
you're welcome. You're welcome. Thank you. And if there's anybody has any other questions, if they'd like to contact you directly, I'm sure they can. And the talk will be available on the Orca website shortly, I think. Thank you very much,
very much.
everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Take
Have a
care.
good weekend.
Bye-bye.
Right.
Bye. Thank you.